Hello, hello. Welcome to another installment of Cage's Comments. I am Alex Cage, and today I will be commenting on the LaMelo Ball trade and the rumors that my team, the Spurs, are. Well, I shouldn't say the Spurs are doing anything. Kawhi Leonard has stated that if he cannot stay with the Clippers, the only places he would re-sign, that he would sign an extension, are the Spurs and Toronto. We will dig into that, whether I think the Spurs should, what that trade could possibly look like, and how I think people might feel about that. A little reunion. So, we'll start with the trade that has actually happened. LaMelo Ball is now a Minnesota Timberwolf, the first and third picks of the 2020 draft are sharing a backcourt. LaMelo Ball goes to the Wolves. Naz Reid, LaMelo Ball, and Josh Green should add go to the Wolves. Naz Reid, an unprotected 2020 or 2033 first rounder, and then swaps in the first round for 28, 29, and 2030 are all headed towards the Hornets. So the fun side of this, the Minnesota side of this, is fascinating in the sense that these guys were in the same draft class, and I think these guys on the court complement each other. I'm not sure off the court they're the best influence for one another, but on the court, LaMelo is a offensive only, great passer, great shooter, not really terribly efficient, and a bit carefree, we'll say. Whereas Ant is a two-way player. He is an efficient scorer, will command a ton of attention, will have a better outlet to do so. But his biggest weakness offensively is probably playmaking, right? And so the Timberwolves as a team have Gobert and McDaniels and Ant, and they re-signed Io, and they will always have, should always have, the guys on the floor with LaMelo to cover up his flaws on the other end. And on offense, while he is individually not that efficient of a scorer, 40% field goal percentage, he does take a ton of threes. So while you would expect that his field goal percentage might be a little lower than you'd like, when you look at his effective field goal percentage or his true shooting percentage, which this last season was 54, the league average is 58, he is still not an efficient scorer, which is, if I'm being honest, as someone who likes to peruse the stats, guys who shoot a good clip, 36, almost, he was 36.3, so 37% on 10 threes a game this year. That is a super high volume and a good percentage. It is really hard when you combine the fact that he was 89.9, 90% from the line this year. It is really hard to then have a true shooting percentage that is below league average. When that is something, if you're unfamiliar with true shooting percentage, it accounts for threes and it accounts for free throws, right? So you would think that that would kind of balance out given the volume. But one, he's not that good at getting to the line. For his career, he only averages 3.5 free throws a game. And last season, he only took 2.5 a game. Part of that's because over half of his shots are 3-pointers. And so that's, not great. It hurts him with the ability, despite the fact that he basically makes all of them, hurts that to actually help his efficiency overall. And then comes the fact that he makes less than half of his 2-pointers. He makes 46% of them last year. That's horrible. That's just bad. He is not an efficient scorer, and he is a complete zero defensively. That being said, if you look at his impact on just the offensive side of the ball, so on day of ball, all right, I went here and filter for guys who've played, we'll just say at least 60 games. Look at their on-off splits and look at the net rating, or their offensive rating, I should say, on-off splits. LaMelo Ball, 11.5 points better the Hornets were per 100 possessions last year when he was on the floor. That's third in the league. The other guys in the top 5 are Jokic, Murray, Kawhi, and SGA. That is the kind of company from a pure statistical impact on your offense that he keeps. There aren't 10 guys better in that regard of I put you on the floor and you give me help create a really good high-end offense. Everything else about LaMelo leaves a ton to be desired, and why I ultimately think this won't go as well as Minnesota is hoping. He is super injury prone. His second year in the league, he played 75 games. Last year, he played 72. And besides that, he played 51, 36, 22, 47. That's just not gonna cut it. He is really injury prone. He misses a ton of games and is a complete negative on defense. And while he has shown the ability to still be a plus overall with how good he is on offense, what we haven't seen is, can he do that in the postseason? Can he still provide plus value on the floor in a postseason setting where you kind of trim all the fat off of the games and the situations? There's no Tuesday nights against the Wizards to bump any of these numbers up. There's no we get to play the 10th, 11th player on the bench. Like, no, it's the top 8 guys from each team, the best teams in the league. And in the West, there are no easy rounds, right? Those just don't exist. So I think this is going to end poorly for Minnesota. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch when he's on the floor, but I am not a LaMelo guy, and I also I don't know that Minnesota has. Ant's not the most mature guy himself, right? Like I have no reason to believe that the leadership in Minnesota is gonna have the ability to help LaMelo grow in the way that he needs to, or at least I think he would need to, in order to contribute to true winning basketball. So that's tough, I think, Minnesota fans, but it's going to be a ton of fun and I understand the upside that Minnesota is chasing, and I do think that they, on the court at least, have the right pieces to complement. So I get it. And as I mentioned, right, the cost is an interesting one here as we kind of transition for the Hornets as well. So it was Reed, right, sixth man of the year. Ostensibly was gonna be a starter this year with Randall gone. Now he can go to the Hornets and probably start, but kind of a fifth, sixth man, good rotation piece, gives you size, gives you shooting. You love that, but not like a super high end future all star kind of player. And then one unprotected first that they just get way out into the future, and then a bunch of swaps with a team that doesn't actually shouldn't really fall off. Like, that's the other interesting part about this in terms of the value in the swaps, is it's really Reed and a first round pick, right? And then the swaps are in 28, 29, and 30, where those are age 28, 29, and 30. Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, like those guys, it's not like you should be really betting on the idea that they're going to have fallen off a cliff by that point. But it's out into the future. You never know what can happen. Injuries can happen. Obviously, LaMelo's got a history of that. Ant could one out, like all these things. So I find that just kind of an interesting point on the fact that Charlotte, as this was reported kind of at the end of the draft, that they're looking to do this. I would have thought that they would have wanted a few more surefire to convey picks, particularly if you don't think the team is going to be bad, right? But this is what they went with. I will say, for Charlotte, I think long term this will be a good decision. I'm a big fan of Khan. I think building around him and Brandon Miller is probably a better thing. I don't think either of those guys have best player on a title team ability, but I don't think LaMelo did either. So are you better off having a kind of good team, in the new lottery world, where you don't actually want to be the worst team in the world, but you also don't want to really just be at the bottom of the postseason or the play-in, right? You want to be somewhere between 4 and 10, right? You have a much better shot at that if you don't have LaMelo, but you still have Naz Reid, who's a good player now, and in Khan and Brandon Miller. They've also re-signed Kobe White, so he can take on some of the shot creation load, right? You draft Christian Anderson, they draft the kid out of Washington, Hans. Like, that's still a functional roster that is missing its true centerpiece. I can be the best player, and your best shot, because you control all your own first round picks, is not being the worst team but not being the best. So maybe that's actually kind of a galaxy brain reason. But my biggest takeaway from this is this situation, and I give the Hornets credit for this. This situation almost always turns into Ja Morant or Trae Young. You have a guy who shows real upside. It has real flaws as either a professional or a player or both, and you always hold on to him a year or two too long. And now the Grizzlies can't get rid of Ja, and the Hawks had to salary dump Trae. The Hornets said, we're not doing that. We're going to cut bait at the best year that LaMelo's had since his second year in the league, right? Played 72 games last year, took less shots last year. Team success was the best that they've had, which was ended up getting clocked in the play-in. And the Hornets didn't put it off, didn't try and say, oh no, we believe in him, he can fit. Like, nope, he's a knucklehead. we're tired of doing this. We've got Khan. We believe in Khan and Brandon Miller. We believe in the two guys that we took in the first round in this draft. We are going to get a useful player in Naz Reid, going to re-sign a guy who was big for us in one of those playing games in Kobe White, and we're going to move forward with these guys and see if we can build around them. And we're going to see if we can max out the value that we get in return. And that's, really what they've done here with this trade. So I agree with the Hornets. I think that's in the realm of sports, it's a courageous thing. You wonder how much of a impact it is that this is a different ownership group and a different front office that drafted LaMelo, as opposed to making this decision, and whether or not, if they had been the group that had drafted him, they would have held on for a year or 2 years longer. But I think this is ultimately a good job by them. I do think I would have thought that they could have gotten at least another true unprotected, just given away pick as opposed to just one and a bunch of swaps. But I think this is I think they deserve credit for not holding on too long in this situation with a guy like this, because I think even if LaMelo goes on to grow up, what I would argue is kind of against all odds, in Minnesota, that he probably wasn't gonna do it with the Hornets. That if he ended up staying in Charlotte, it probably wasn't going to play out that way. That maybe this is a wake up call to LaMelo, and he's like, oh wow, I wanted to stay in Charlotte. I liked it, but all of the other stuff was so ridiculous that they ended up getting rid of me anyway. I need to be better, so I will in Minnesota. But I think the Hornets deserve a ton of credit for a move that does carry real risk if LaMelo ends up, getting his stuff together. But I doubt he gets his stuff together. So, as far as Minnesota and their chances of winning the West, I don't think this really increases it that much. I think they're still in the, Minnesota, or yeah, they're in the same tier as Minnesota. In the same in the Denver, in that tier with Houston, I would say, and then maybe with the Lakers, depending on pending free agency. But pending free agency, and because of the moves they've made of getting rid of Randall and moving Reed in this deal, they still have some flexibility. I believe they still have their mid-level exception. So if they can go out and replace some of the size, whether it be Rui Hachimura or maybe John Collins, all right, and replace that kind of stretch four spot that they've opened up here with moving Reed, they could still be really dangerous, right? Like there's a world where they're able to keep Io on the bench, where Terrence Shannon Jr. looks like he did in the postseason, right, and really kind of comes alive. And then if they're able to fill in the Naz Reid spot, then that's a dangerous, LaMelo, Edwards, McDaniels, insert stretch four here, Gobert, and then Ao, Shannon, and Terrence Shannon is a nice, kind of 7-man rotation. And in 8, really, if you can find if their backup big Behringer takes a step forward. So they still have potential. They are not to be discounted, but I don't think this really moves them up a tier. But if you're a Minnesota fan, you gotta feel kind of nice that you're that when it looked like maybe your team was gonna take a step back with just salary dumping Randall and not seeming and kind of missing out on Giannis, front office said nope, we're still pushing, we're still all in, trying to maximize right now with Anthony Edwards, and there is real upside to this. even if I am really confident, to be honest, that it's not going to come to fruition for them. I don't think this answers the OKC or San Antonio questions because he's such a liability on defense that I think both of those teams are just gonna abuse that if they end up in a series with him. So, all that being said, I think Charlotte deserves a ton of credit, but I understand why Minnesota would make this deal and the upside that they could get from it. So, the Spurs and Kawhi. So Jake Fisher and then Mark Stein on the Stein line, Substack have reported Kawhi Leonard would prefer to stay with the Clippers, but he would sign an extension with the Raptors or the Spurs, and those are the only teams. He's not interested if the Heat try to trade for him or if anybody else besides his two former teams try to trade for him. He is not interested in signing an extension there. What does that mean? I think that means he wants to stay in LA, as he said, and he is simply trying to use the fact that he would sign the extension with San Antonio or Toronto to have them cough up the money that he wants. But for the sake of having a good bit of fun here, we're going to go down the rabbit hole and say that this is a real possibility that they're considering for the Spurs. So the first trade, well, I should say this. First trade that most people would want is they're going to look at Kawhi's salary of $50 million. They're going to look at De'Aaron Fox's salary of $49 million and a half dollars and be like, oh, that's it. The Spurs can get out of De'Aaron Fox, and who cares if we don't like Kawhi anymore? Get out of De'Aaron Fox. I would implore those people to look one person down on the salary cap for the Clippers and remember that they have a small $40+ million a year point guard in Darius Garland, and they drafted a point guard at number 5 overall. So in no world does it exist that De'Aaron Fox for Kawhi Leonard is a swap. So just if you're your first time opening up the salary cap, the first time looking at Spotrac, and you're like, oh wow, look at that, we can just swap. No, that's not a thing. The next one that would work that I thought of pretty much immediately and then saw half a dozen tweets. Vassell and Keldon Johnson combined are going to make $44.5 $45 million, $45.5 million next season. That could work. I think I think you'd probably have to throw in one of the first round picks, probably Quintus as well, so the Clippers could have, a guy for the future when you're trading away an established star. And if next year was the last year of the NBA, I would do that. I think the only thing from a kind of tangible standpoint for the Kawhi piece for the Spurs is what is that extension? All of this makes me feel like Kawhi is looking to stay at $45-50 million a year. If that's the case, that should just automatically be a no-go for the Spurs. There's just no way 2 years from now you want to have Kawhi Leonard on your books for $45 or $50 million. You have Wembanyama's extension, who is going to kick in next, not this year, but the next. And then the year after that is when Castle's extension should kick in. And the year after that is where Harper's and ostensibly Carter Bryant's extension as well. So I wouldn't want to do that. Now, if Kawhi is actually saying, no, I'm not looking for 45 or 50 million. I'm looking for like $30 million a year. At that point, if I were the Spurs, and as you look at their cap sheet, you realize Vassell's going to make 25. Vassell's going to make 27 next year, 25 the year after that, which would be the first year of the Kawhi extension, and 27 the year after that. So he's scheduled in the 2 years that you would be looking at kind of the Kawhi extension to be making $52 million combined. If that is, and that's, basically averages out to 26. Kawhi is better than Vassell. If he were willing to take the $30 million a year, then I would, as a Spurs, I would pull that trigger. He is, you're probably gonna, that would probably be Vassell, Johnson, Quaintus, and probably at least one more future first, maybe two. If it were Atlanta's next year and the swap that you own with Boston, I feel good about those because those picks are probably not going to be that high, right? So I think that's fine because that's where you look at the cap sheet and you assume, okay, so Wemby's extension is going to kick in and it's going to be 5 years, 250 at least. That's $50 million, but you're probably moving off of Fox next summer. So you just kind of swap those spots, right? The year after that is where Castle comes in. And then the year after that is the last year of Kawhi. And now we're into Harper and Bryant's extension. So his money comes off the books as those guys would start getting expensive. And I think that works just fine. And then, of course, the basketball side of that is he answers basically every question that the Spurs came away with. Hey, could we get someone who can play, truly play the power forward spot in today's game? Yep, check. Can we get someone? Would he keep the spacing on offense? Yes, he would. He's an excellent 3-point shooter. Can we get someone that we know can be a bucket, besides just relying on Dylan Harper's ascension to be a guy that we can just give the ball at the end of the games and we know he can go get a shot? Yes, we can. So he answers basically every question. He would certainly be the best player of all the available or quasi-available wings, whether it's Rui in free agency, a prayer that or the Magic would give up Franz, right? Like all of those guys, he would be the best. And if that's the kind of extension that he'd be willing to agree to, I would do that, and I think the Spurs should do that. That being said, there's no reporting that I've seen that the Spurs are actually interested, and I don't think, given the way that this has kind of been reported, that he wants to stay with the Clippers, but he'll go sign, but only at these two spots. I think he wants another big extension. I think he wants $45-50 million still, and I don't think you should do that. You don't want to be paying Kawhi Leonard $50 million at age 36. I just don't think that's a good business decision when you consider his injury history and all that. On the other note, I am not a reporter. I have no idea how the organization and the people in that building feel about how he left almost a decade ago. I am, however, a Spurs season ticket holder and a lifelong Spurs fan. And I was in person at the game when the Spurs came back this regular season from like 25 points down against the Clippers. And I can tell you this, he got booed in the starting lineups. He got booed damn near every time he touched the ball. Anecdotally, that city still doesn't like him. Now, there's an old adage that if you make decisions based on the fans, you will be sitting with the fans soon enough. So I'm not so sure how much that should really factor into this, but if it factors in at all, it's a negative for that reunion. I don't think Spurs fans like him. I personally am not. I don't think I've got a single grudge I've held for 8 years against an individual, and certainly not against an individual that I've never actually met. But I am not most fans. I am in the minority, and that city still doesn't like him every time he comes back. So I think that's a fun exercise. I think ultimately he probably just gets his money because Steve Ballmer's got more money than God. And they just, keep chugging along there in LA in what has been one of the most disappointing, overhyped eras in NBA history. But it is a fun thought exercise. You guys let me know what you think in the comments, if they actually should, if you also still hate Kawhi, and See you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Like, rate, subscribe, comments, all that good jazz. Bye, guys.